Okay, so what did Tommy Wiseau get sued for?
So there's a production team here in Canada making a documentary about Tommy, and they're not just focusing on The Room. I think they're going back into his, up until now, very shady past.
Right.
And revealing certain things like the fact that he apparently was born in Poland and things like that. Things that Tommy has been like hell bent on keeping secret this whole time. And it's kind of, he uses it to kind of like fuel the mystery around him, you know?
Right.
And so apparently Tommy tried to sue these guys when it became clear that like, they were going to reveal this information about him, pulling back the curtain. And apparently like they were just in general, like the documentary was not going to be super flattering towards Tommy. So he went to court and they pulled him in. Apparently he was here in Toronto actually defending himself because that's where the lawsuit was being argued. And he took 2 days to try and defend himself on the stand. And he was trying to use all of his like typical Wiseau like nonsense to sort of delay things. I wish that Canada, for just this once, had allowed TV cameras into its courts. I know it's a big thing in the States.
Yeah.
You know, there's almost like a whole like reality TV kind of thing from courtroom stuff in the States. Here in Canada, it's not a thing. But just this once, I would have liked an exception.
Yeah, well, like the whole thing about not having cameras there, I don't get, because part of it's just record keeping, right?
Sure.
So I think in Canada, rather than videotaping these, they actually still have, I think, those artists who draw scenes in the courtroom.
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. That's awesome. But I think we've talked enough about Tommy Wiseau.
Welcome to episode 74 of the Extra Buttery Podcast, a free-flowing conversation between two guys who love movies and TV. This time on the show, we're going to be talking about the Netflix original All Day and a Night, starring Jeffrey Wright and Ashton Sanders, the Eddy, the new limited series from Damien Chazelle, Oscar winner for La La Land, as well as the Netflix series Midnight Gospel, a sort of trippy animated creation from Pendleton Ward and Duncan Trussell. And we'll check in on The Last Dance, which is getting near the end of its blockbuster run, simultaneous on Netflix and ESPN. But let's get things started with this All Day and a Night. You were the one who kind of suggested this to me before we were getting ready for this episode. So how did you come across this one?
Google, just like anything else that comes across my table, I guess. I think Netflix does a really poor job of announcing what movies are coming on next. Either that or I'm just not subscribed to the right platforms. But this was a movie that I stumbled upon, and I kind of have an affinity for hood films.
Okay.
So films about Black kids from the projects that deal with racism and poverty and all sorts of stuff like that. The main reason I was interested, though, was because of Ashton Sanders, who actually played teenage Chiron in Moonlight, who I thought did a fantastic job. And I was curious as to what these three actors would do in their follow-up to Moonlight. So we saw the adult version of Chiron kind of go on to do Predator and a bunch of other films. And so Ashton Sanders did this hood film about a kid named Jakor in Oakland, who is the son of a drug and alcohol abuser, played by Jeffrey Wright. His name is JD.
Hey, Jakor!
My father taught me how to take your life out on everybody else.
It's dog-eat man out there. If he don't learn that in here, he ain't gonna make it.
My son won't be nothing like you.
I just thought it was a very interesting film, too, because of the director, Joe Robert Cole, who kind of reached new heights when he wrote Black Panther with Ryan Coogler. And this was just his second stint as a director since 2011 when he did Amber Lake, which I believe is this like really, really small budget film that never got a wide release.
Right. And like I think I'd seen the trailer for this, and you know, I'm definitely on board with the people behind the camera on this. I mean, you know, it's always good to see new voices getting picked up by Netflix. You know, they write and produce a film, and Netflix is trying to get a wider audience for it. And this movie also has a female cinematographer, which is not something that you see very often at all. But I don't know, in terms of like my take on this particular movie, it didn't really jump out for me in any particular way. Like
okay, interesting.
Yeah, it like, you know, there's definitely a lot of talent there. Like, it's well shot. I liked Jeffrey Wright's performance. I liked a lot of the other performers. But the writing just didn't really jump off the screen for me. It didn't feel like it was really, it didn't have anything new to say. Like, I feel like I've seen a lot of other hood movies that had come across these ideas first. And but the thing is, like, the movie is still very earnest. It has something to say about like these neighborhoods and this cycle of violence and everything. So it's not that it doesn't have a purpose, but it feels like maybe it could have been actually better done as like a documentary about a neighborhood rather than, you know, dramatizing it.
I guess the proper precursor to all these hood films is Menace to Society and Boys in the Hood. Have you seen both of those films?
No, I haven't seen those.
Okay, so those two films are like cultural landmarks in this genre, and I highly, highly, highly recommend them. All Day and Night is not in the same tier. I think those two films came out at a time where corruption in the LAPD was very rampant and well known. This was their famed crash unit, which resulted in like a huge LAPD wide investigation that basically led to the closure of the unit and also showcased a lot of racial profiling and white versus black dynamics. So in that sense, yeah, I agree. There's not much original about this film. There's not many themes that it introduces that are very different from all the other previous films. What I do like, though, as you pointed out, are the performances. I thought Jeffrey Wright was awesome, but I also thought Ashton Sanders was really great. He's really good at playing characters who I think bottle up a lot of emotions and then just snap. And when they snap, it is both equally terrifying and violent. If you remember back to Moonlight, there's a sequence where Ashton Sanders gets bullied and he kind of takes it, and in a fit of rage, he walks through school and he picks up a chair and then he just destroys his bully with it. I think there's a lot of that in this performance, so I'm not surprised that he did a really good job because he did it in Moonlight. What I do like about this film is its execution. I think a lot of the themes and sort of the foreshadowing that it brings forth is followed through. So, for example, the movie starts where Jakor is in his car. He's rapping to himself lyrics about black people killing black people. And there's like this sort of like somber piano music playing in the background. So right off the bat, you're like, all right, this is not a happy film, you know? And it really follows through on it. And I think the other thing too that's really interesting is that it is not linear. It's kind of like Moonlight again, in that there's three separate parts to it. So there's Jakor as a kid, where they showcase his relationship with his father. There's Jakor leading up to the events where he commits murder, and then the events following that where he's in prison. And it kind of jumps back and forth, and there's narration that goes on in the background where he explains why certain things happen and how certain things happen. And I think it comes together very well. There are certain plot points that are more nuanced. So there's like this subplot about like a gang war, and there's a betrayal and a double crossing, and it is a little hard to follow in that sense, but I don't think that was ever the focus of the film. I think the main thesis was that these are the elements that Jakor has to deal with, and this is a story about Jakor personally and how he comes to terms with it. I think a lot of other hood films usually engage in some sort of like broader discussion about like politics and social economics, but in this film in particular, I think the white male authority figure is very much in the background. And in fact, I don't think, other than the police officer, the random guy, and a lawyer, I think here and there, they don't really make that much of an appearance.
No, that's true. And like there's a line that gets repeated at least a couple of times in the movie where Jakor says something like, slavery taught black people how to survive, but not how to live.
Exactly.
And,
yes.
And that's kind of like, that's really driving the movie, because it suggests that like, even if there was no interaction at all with white people, or between white people and the people in this community that we're kind of observing, they might still find ways of kind of perpetuating violence and, going after each other, not because they want to, but because, they're locked into this kind of cycle.
Right. And there's an arc of self-discovery to Jakor's story, too, that you see a lot of these films. It's not a particularly happy ending, but there is the sense that he's found sort of a new path towards something that's not, gang related or going back to the neighborhood. He finds a little more purpose in life.
Yeah, and it took a while to get there too. Like that's one of the things that kind of
it is a little long. It is a little
long, right? Like I feel like if they could have maybe trimmed 15 minutes and because it feels like in the final maybe 10 minutes of the movie, that's when they finally kind of show you that corner that Jakor is about to turn. And I get like you want a lot of buildup. You don't want it to happen like too easily. Yeah. You don't want it to feel convenient. But it almost to me it felt a little bit tacked on. Like they were going in a bleaker direction, and then they decided to immediately change course because they didn't want to totally bum out the audience.
Well, you still get kind of bumped out, but the final scene where he confronts his childhood best friend in that prison courtyard, I think that is really pivotal, and it only works if you draw out the relationship they had earlier.
Right.
And it's really in those quiet moments that you really understand these characters, because Jakor he doesn't really talk a whole bunch.
No.
In fact, he's got this monotone sort of delivery to him where there's a scene where he kind of freaks out emotionally in his car because something really bad happened to his friend. But other than that, he's cool as a cucumber. And I really like that dynamic between like the stoicism and the sort of well of emotion that he's trying to bottle up and control. And in terms of like, I know a lot of critics, because after I watched this, I read critics reviews of this, and I also wrote one of my own, but I kind of disagree about taking points away for being cliched, because first of all, it'd kind of be like if I was criticizing a superhero origin film for having like the good guy win all the time. Like there's certain things you just expect.
Right.
And from the very beginning, like it's very clear that he is going to lay down a whole sack of cliches on you, and you're just going to have to accept it. Because of the recent shooting of Amari Arbery.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you think about hood films and the themes that they talk about and the themes they talk about in this film, yes, there's nothing much different. In fact, I don't think there's anything different. But have we really come that far since the 1980s and 90s? Like, has really anything changed? So if anything, I feel like it's not a cliche because clearly we still don't understand the struggles or haven't attempted to fix any of these struggles.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's where like maybe the script could have been a little bit more subtle in that regard. Like because to me it read like, Did you think it was preachy though? I didn't think it was preachy at all. At certain times I did. Yeah, it felt a little bit like they were just saying like, all right, we're stuck here. There's no way out. Even though the one kid who tries to better himself by joining the military is wounded in an IED attack overseas and disabled for his entire life. So even like they suggest that like even the people who try to escape can't really escape. It like builds and builds and builds, and of course, like they're making a point by having it build up to this crescendo. But I don't know. It felt to me a little bit like the movie was kind of spinning its wheels before it finally hit upon what it wanted to say about that particular problem. Because I don't know. It just for some reason it felt like it was in a few brief moments. It was kind of like hitting you over the head with the same kind of lesson. Did you ever feel uncomfortable watching this? Like, were there any moments that made you feel scared or? No, not really. No. I feel like I'd seen these kind of dynamics in other movies before, so it didn't really catch me off guard in that way. I see. There was, I think, a couple times in the film where I feel like Jakor would turn a corner and he doesn't. And it's sort of watching like a slow-mo train wreck where he's put in these positions where he can't succeed and he's forced to make the bad decision or the wrong decision.
and you know something bad is coming. So like they tease out the final confrontation with him and TQ, his best friend, in the prison yard. And I thought that was very well done. I think it's the expectation that something bad is going to happen, but you don't exactly know how or when, that really pulls me into this film, because I do think emotionally it can be quite gripping. I think there are a lot of, especially the performance itself, where it does become quite convincing.
Right. Yeah, no, I can see those things. Yeah, I just for one reason or another, it didn't connect with me. But
well, I would suggest watching Boys in the Hood first and then Menace to Society. I don't want to say you would view this differently, but I think it would be more helpful in understanding where this movie comes from, because I think it does take a lot of elements from those movies.
Yeah, I can understand that. Yeah, like if you jump into a genre after it's already had a few decades to kind of develop, sometimes you're missing some sort of context there. So that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and the flashbacks too. I think I can't remember which film actually does it, but it's used very effectively here, I think.
Well, yeah, I agree with that on the most part. There was one flashback though that felt like it was very out of place.
Which one?
There's one moment where I think it's like in the first half of the movie where Jeffrey Wright's character comes home and he's upset because Jakor got suspended from school.
Right.
And he's kind of menacing Jakor's mother and getting up in her face. And then he kind of he says to Jakor, "All right, let's leave. Let's get it. Let's go in the car and get out of here." You know. Mm-hmm. And then like what feels like at least 45 minutes goes by, and then we finally get another flashback that begins after that moment where they're now in the car and they're just kind of like having a heart to heart sort of. And to me, like that second flashback felt like it should have happened a lot sooner.
Okay, fair enough.
That might be my like editor brain kicking in, where I'm like, if I was cutting that, I would have advanced it a little bit more just so we got more punch from it.
Because in between, there's a scene where Ashton's mom comes to visit him in the prison, and she says something along the lines of, "Yeah, your dad fucked up, but he did a lot of things because he loved you."
Right.
And that second flashback where they're drinking in the car, I assume has happened more than once on occasion.
Right.
This is something that happens repeatedly. And it was basically the same confession that from JD's mouth that, yes, he knows he's messed up, but at the same time, he's trying to show Jakor what this like man eat dog world that's out there, as he says.
Right.
The violence in this film is quite short and sudden, and there's a key murder scene that kind of kicks everything off in the first 10, 15 minutes or so. And then there's another scene at the end. I wouldn't say there's a lot of gang warfare. There's not a lot of torture, and it's not really grisly. How did you respond to the violence? Because I didn't expect it to be that violent. I thought it would be more of a melodrama, more of a talky drama.
Yeah, like I think they use the violence fairly well. Like they use the action scenes very sparingly, and they don't, because like, I mean, not to psychoanalyze it too much, but like maybe if they had too many action scenes, it would start to feel like they were using them for like thrills. And you don't want to use action in that sense for this type of movie. You want it to kind of reinforce the fact that a lot of these characters never feel safe. They don't know when, they might walk around a corner and that's it.
Because I think having that trio of friends is really effective because they all kind of respond to violence in different ways.
Yeah.
So TQ obviously is the most violent of the bunch, and he kind of goes down the darkest path. Jakor wants to avoid it, but in the end he doesn't. Lamarck tries to avoid it by joining the military, but he ends up being a victim of both the war and the country itself and how they treat their own veterans.
Right.
So I thought that was very interesting as well, just how the three kids represented the three different paths that they took. But speaking of different paths in crime, we watched the Eddy, which is the new limited Netflix series, 8 episodes, 4 directors. The first 2 directed by Damien Chazelle.
Yes.
And it's about Andre Holland plays Elliott, who is this musician / bar owner who's trying to, I guess, make a new life for himself in Paris.
Yeah, he plays a guy who, as the show kind of teases out details, it's very sparing with background information. You really have to listen close.
Yes.
We slowly learn over the course of a few episodes that he was a famous jazz musician in New York, and he experienced a family tragedy, which caused him to separate from his wife and flee to Paris, where he met up with another talented musician, and the two of them founded this jazz club called the Eddy. And they're kind of trying to scratch out a living in the Paris nightlife.
Kiss me in the morning, and then you call me late at night.
You were pretty fantastic tonight.
I'll tell you what I'm thinking.
First time I've seen my club full.
You always seem to get it right.
Hey, bonsoir.
On est fermé. Hey.
I'm here for money.
What's wrong with you?
As the action begins in the show, they've clearly had the club running for a period of time, and they're not getting like huge crowds coming out. Like they have enough to stay alive. But it becomes clear that Elliott's business partner, Farid, has started to make some deals on the side with some less than savory characters to try to save a bit of money. You know, he's buying like black market booze to stock the bar with, and you know, maybe there's some counterfeit money floating around and things like that. And so this kind of builds to a head in the course of the pilot episode, and there's this new tragedy that happens, and that leaves Elliott kind of reeling because not only does he have to worry about all of this professional and personal drama, but then all of a sudden his daughter comes to stay with him from New York, and you know, he's trying to deal with like a 16-year-old who has her own share of trauma from the tragedy.
Yeah.
On top of like, you know, the bad habits that she's picked up from her father over the years. So
musicians, am I right?
Yeah.
Always the worst.
Yeah. It just makes for like a lot of separate little dramas happening all at once. And of course, like this is all set on the canvas of like jazz music, which, you know, isn't for everybody. I understand that. But who better than Damien Chazelle to direct the first two episodes? Because he's been probably one of the most outspoken or prominent people to kind of make movies about jazz in the past little while.
Yeah. So Damien Chazelle has a problem. Well, not necessarily a problem, but his trademark is asshole geniuses. So if you're a genius astronaut like Neil Armstrong, or a genius drummer like Miles Teller, or a genius jazz musician like Elliott, it kind of gives you a free hall pass to be a dick to everyone.
Right.
So the funny thing about this film is that, or TV series, I should say, each episode is about an hour long, which is usually a bit longer than what we're used to. And I would say half of it is just people playing jazz and not necessarily playing it well, because
okay, no, I'm gonna fight you on that,
because he hates the music. But that's the part what I mean about asshole genius. Like, these are really capable musicians, but he's just so anal retentive. Nothing is ever good enough.
I see. Okay, I see what you mean. Yeah, I thought you were saying that like
No, the music's written by like Glenn Ballard, who did Alanis Morissette's Jagged Little Pill, which is like one of the most famous alt rock albums out there. Randy Kerber won an Oscar for The Color Purple. So it's like the music is written by really capable people. I'm just talking about Elliott as a character himself, where he's just like never satisfied. And he kind of reminds me of J.K. Simmons in Whiplash.
Yes.
Where like he starts berating Miles Teller for like, are you rushing or are you dragging? And sometimes to the average viewer, you're just like, I have no freaking clue. But he's mad, so I should be mad as well.
Yes.
And I think the most interesting part about the Eddy isn't necessarily the music. It's the relationships between the musicians that really like catch my attention.
Yeah, and they really encourage you to kind of like get into all those dynamics too, because we haven't even mentioned the fact that Elliott was in a romantic relationship with the lead singer from the house band. So that leads to like all kinds of like romantic tensions and arguments and things that
he's constantly asking her to sing in octaves or notes that she's not comfortable singing because her voice just doesn't really go there.
And then what's also cool is as you go further into the series, each episode is titled after one of the characters.
Yes.
And
So it's kind of like an anthology, really.
yeah, it has an aspect of like, individual stories separated out into episodes. But I mean, they still run the through line of like Elliott's kind of main plot. Even in the episodes that are not expressly about him. So it's not like we totally leave him behind and like we're wondering what he's been up to. But we do focus very heavily on individual members of the band and Elliott's daughter and other people, so that you really get a very well developed kind of picture of how all the threads interconnect.
I would say sort of. I kind of disagree with mind you, I'm only 2 episodes in because compared to All Day and Night, if you thought All Day and Night was boring, I thought the Eddy was boring.
Oh no. Okay.
I could not sit through people arguing about jazz when I'm just more interested in the relationships and what happens outside the jazz. Like I get the sort of like dissonance in musical taste is kind of like the basis of their problems with each other. But I don't need 20 minutes of freestyle jazz to really know that. But this TV show is like done in different languages, right? So like there's French in there, there's Polish in there. If you turn on the subtitles and the closed captioning, sometimes it'll describe the jazz that they're playing, and it's really funny because it adds to the narrative. So there's a part where like Maya sing, the lead singer, and then the subtitle has Maya sings flat.
Oh yeah.
And then there's a jazz soloist who kind of is doing a solo, and then the subtitles say abstract shrieking, or like the bass is playing a riff and it says grimy riff. I thought that was really funny. Kind of like if you don't know what's going on, the subtitles explain exactly to you how Elliott is thinking.
Well, let me ask you this though: like before you watched either the Eddy or prior to that Whiplash, where Chazelle really burst onto the scene, how much patience do you have for jazz music in general?
I'd say pretty good. Two of my college roommates were jazz musicians.
Okay, because like I know that. There's a really funny scene in episode 4, actually, of the Eddy, where the club that Elliott runs has been closed temporarily due to a police investigation. Right. And the musicians in the house band aren't able to play, so they're picking up gigs wherever they can, and they find themselves taking a gig at a wedding, an outdoor wedding. And they open up their set by playing like their typical kind of like, intense jazz kind of riff. And they get like maybe 2 of their friends dancing, but no one else at the wedding is into it at all, because they clearly like they hired the band to play covers of pop hits. Right.
And they refuse to, right? They're just like, we're better than that.
There's a bridezilla who's there, and she, it's her wedding, and she angrily calls over the person, the wedding venue organizer type guy, and she's like, why are they not playing our songs? Nobody's getting up and dancing. And so she has a little tantrum, and they tell the band that they have to play the set list, and then they kind of grudgingly launch into, and they do an excellent job because they're fantastic musicians. They launch into this like French pop song that I guess is very popular these days, and immediately the entire like wedding guests all get up and start ripping up the dance floor, and the bride says something to the effect of like, "Oh, I'm glad we got rid of the elevator music," and I'm like, lady, elevator music? What they were playing was like blistering, like some of the best shit you could ever want to listen to, but. See, you sound like my college roommate. So having hung around with jazz musicians a fair bit in college, a lot of the arguments that they have are just like, they seem like memories to me. Like somewhere I've heard these people bicker about who's playing fast, who's playing slow, who's doing his own thing and who's. I mean, I don't even have the bona fides really, other than like, my dad was a jazz musician in his spare time. So I grew up listening to jazz, going to jazz clubs, when I was old enough to and everything. So I'm more steeped in it. I don't have the musical ear to kind of like recognize necessarily like slow, fast, like mistakes or anything like that. But I enjoy listening to it just in general. So it's my kind of thing.
And the second part of that is one of my college roommates ended up being a musician on those cruise ships. And at one point he said the same thing. He's just like, I'm so damn frustrated playing the same goddamn tunes people recommend or request all the damn time, and I'm just sick of it. So a lot of the music stuff and sort of the relationships between the musicians really ring true to me, just because I've like personally seen firsthand what it's like. I just think that it's, other than the jazz stuff, it's very bare. Like, I found the first 2 episodes pretty tough to get through at times.
I can see that. Yeah. I mean, like,
so Amanda Stenberg, who plays Julie, Elliott's daughter, she's like, I think she's a really good actress. So she was in The Hate U Give, which is, again, another sort of Black film about racism and whatnot. And she was really good in it. She's really good in this, but her character is annoying as all hell.
yeah.
And it kind of goes on for, I'd say, maybe 20 minutes more than it needs to for each episode. I get geniuses. I don't get it. It's not appealing to me when they start bickering about who's the most genius.
Right.
And it doesn't appeal to me when they start being assholes to each other, which almost feels like it comes with the territory with any creative sort of like profession. But it's just like, I'm so done with your drama. Please, let's move on, because we have this plot about Farid, which is either like shoehorned in or just there to capture the average viewer, like a sort of like subplot that's supposed to be like edgy and dark and scary. And if you don't care about this jazz stuff, at least you can care about this subplot involving the police and murder.
Yeah, I can see that. And like I'll agree with you that those 2 initial episodes are probably 10 minutes too long. And there is like, I can almost like, even though I haven't read any reviews of the show yet, I can almost see some of the critiques already, because there's already a sense with Damien Chazelle, being that he directed these first 2 episodes, and the fact that he was granted the special permission to shoot those 2 episodes on film rather than digital. All the other directors had to shoot digital, and they had to stick to Netflix's rules about, you know, what cameras to use and all of that. But Damien Chazelle, Oscar winner, is allowed to kind of come in and get a special pass, and he gets to make 2 extra long episodes shot on film. So I can already see a few people kind of going like, he's a little bit full of himself. He's a little bit, you know.
I totally get that. That's the way I feel.
And I understand that criticism a lot. And I feel like the material isn't there to really justify that level of kind of specialness.
It feels self-indulgent a little.
Yes. Yeah, that's the exact word I'm looking for. It's not self-indulgent to like, to the point that it ruins the experience, but it's enough to call attention to itself. And for me, at least. And it's something where like, I know that this is not going to win Chazelle any more fans. Like, if you were already kind of annoyed with him from like La La Land, for example, there was, he made some enemies in the like musical movie fandom with that thing, because it felt like, you know, the Ryan Gosling character, for example, is the type of guy who's kind of like an annoying jazz fan who looks down on any other kind of music. And
yes, and that's so many of these like genius assholes, and like the argument behind them, like, I am better than you. My opinion is more right than yours.
My music is more like intellectual or whatever.
Exactly. And I hate those kind of arguments, because to me, music can be really personal. If you don't like jazz, it doesn't mean you don't like music or that you don't appreciate good music.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think like there's definitely as the show goes on, like now that I've watched half of the episodes, you know, and they move away from like Chazelle's stuff a little bit. You know, they don't. It's not like,
that's good news, because I almost like am gonna give up on this show.
Yeah, no, it's like obviously it's not like night and day or anything. It's not like it becomes a whole different show, but they do start building in more of the other characters. It becomes less about Elliott's kind of insanity. And they're developing some more of the other relationships when Elliott's not on screen. So I think that was essential, because if the show had continued down that kind of path, it would have just been it would have felt a little bit too much of like a Chazelle sandbox kind of experience where only fans of his would get any value out of it.
Have you finished it? You haven't finished it, right? But you will.
No, I've got 4 episodes to go. I'll definitely finish it. I'm curious to see where they go with it.
Right. And it's funny too that the Eddy and All Day and Night have this like sort of musical connection, because in All Day and Night, Jakor's kind of like path out of the hood is to be this rap artist.
Yeah, you could almost make an argument for like, a sort of like double bill kind of experience where you kind of see, how music and the neighborhood kind of influences people living in Oakland versus people living in this kind of artsy commune type environment in Paris.
Pretentious.
I mean, there's clearly, there's still a lot of like hard scrabble kind of like making money wherever you can,
right?
In both
of
contexts.
Course, yes.
So it's, their jazz music might have like a intellectual or kind of like a wealthy kind of air about it, but a lot of the people who perform it, they're just kind of hand to mouth in many cases.
Speaking of non-pretentious things, though. The Midnight Gospel. So this was something that you kind of introduced me to. How did you hear about this?
Well, I've been watching over like the past couple of years. I've been slowly keeping up with Adventure Time,
right?
Which is a show on Cartoon Network that came from a guy named Pendleton Ward. And the Adventure Time is a very difficult kind of experience to explain to people because on the surface, it looks very much like a kiddie cartoon show. It's about a young kid living in this kind of fantastical land. He's got a best friend who's this kind of stretchy, transforming dog character named Jake. And they go on adventures, and each episode is like your classic kids, like 22-minute kind of length. But the more you watch Adventure Time, the more adult content kind of seeps in, the more kind of like existential quandaries and really dark kind of revelations about how this world that we're seeing has come to be.
Right.
There's some really like, you can watch Adventure Time as an adult and get quite a bit out of it that a kid would not pick up on at all. And we're not talking about like...
Is it a kid's cartoon? I get the feeling that it's not actually targeted at kids.
The early seasons probably skew a bit more towards kids, but are probably double marketed. Like you could show plenty of the early episodes to kids and they wouldn't be afraid of it. Like the visuals wouldn't freak them out. Later episodes, you might want to pick and choose. Like you wouldn't want to show every episode to a kid because there is some spooky stuff that happens.
Yeah, I think there's a good cross section between kid shows and stoner shows.
Yeah.
I think there's a part of like a kid's brain and a stoner's brain where like they get stimulated by the similar kind of concepts and jokes. And let's not forget the Midnight Gospel was released on April 20th, 4/20. So
it had to be intentional.
Yeah, of course it's intentional. And
so that brings us to Midnight Gospel, which is like, it's got Pendleton Ward on it. I'm not entirely sure like if he brought how many of his team from Adventure Time over to produce this, but there definitely seems to be like the style of the animation is similar. It's surreal and there's all kinds of like transforming characters who kind of like shift bodies and stuff, but the content is way more adult.
Which universe will you choose today?
My name's Clancy. Clancy! Could I interview you for my space cast? Are you worried because it seems like we're all about to die?
Is that a yes? What does death look like to you?
Well, this one too, the Midnight Gospel, I think the animation is more rough on purpose. It actually looks like someone started animating things on Paint.
Right.
Because it's kind of pixelated and the animation's not super smooth, and so it kind of skips, so it kind of feels like old animation, or like if you're flipping through PowerPoint slides really fast or pictures really fast,
right.
Like flip book kind of style to it.
Because the whole thing about the plot of the show is that a lot of the action is supposed to happen in like a computer simulation,
right? And it's like apocalyptic all the time, right?
Yeah.
And so it's really funny that I think, even though there are a lot of jokes that clearly went over my head, I thoroughly enjoyed it. A lot of the conversations don't make any sense. It's kind of like the universe is the universe type of conversation, where it's kind of like roundabout way of saying things, but repeating them at the same time.
And if you were to like queue up a random episode without knowing anything about it, you might be a little bit confused because...
Yeah, definitely a lot confused.
You might start to notice that what it sounds like a podcast episode.
Yes.
About like spirituality and existentialism and stuff like that. And that's because,
right,
broadly speaking, it is exactly that. It's a recycled podcast episode.
Exactly. So I think it's Duncan Trussell, right? who's a comedian who does these interviews, and then certain clips from those interviews are put in the show and animated with them. So like it'd be kind of like if what you and I say on this podcast is turned into animated form.
Yeah.
And turned into a TV show. It'd be kind of something like that. I don't know how that would work out, but I think it'd be kind of interesting.
It would be interesting. We would have to be like, you would have to see like animated versions of us, but like we were occasionally like pulling off our own heads or like growing extra arms or, you know, that
big beings that just like consume earths and buildings and just devour us whole.
Yeah.
And like,
because the first episode is like, it's about, you know, the main character, Clancy. He has this computer simulation machine in his trailer that allows him to kind of like stick his head in and insert himself into the simulation of a world that's about to experience an apocalypse. And the first one he launches himself into is like a zombie apocalypse. But the whole time he's down on the surface, like experiencing this catastrophe, he's speaking to the resident president of the United States, not about like the zombies that are chasing after them, but about like drug policy in the United States.
Yeah. I don't think you can watch this show sober, though.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
I think you definitely have to be drinking or smoking or on something to really get the most out of it.
Yeah.
Kind of like how South Park is just funnier when you're stoned or drunk, you know, like, because I think it kind of takes the edge off. You just kind of roll with the punches. You don't really question a whole lot. You don't question why their arms are falling off or why things are being eaten or why they're saying the things they are. Is there like a real sort of audience for this kind of stuff, you think? Or is it always going to be like a cult show rather than something mainstream?
I think with this, it would be hard to branch it out super wide because
like Adventure Time was kind of niche and then became kind of mainstream because it had like Lego IP and a bunch of people got into it and it wasn't so cult and niche anymore.
No, and they weren't trying to integrate you know, random podcast clips into the main bulk of the episode. You know, their Adventure Time episodes still had a basic plot and an adventure kind of format, but these are like, you know, just wanderings and the stuff that they're talking about in the podcast clips is also very much like heady stuff that doesn't have any kind of real resolution. They're kind of like, you could accuse them of talking in circles. Like they kind of like, they discuss a topic, but they don't really get anywhere with it. And
they just repeat words in different sentences.
Yeah. And sometimes it feels like they're just kind of like talking to hear themselves talk. And
they're probably stoned doing the podcast. So
yeah, probably
it makes even less sense when they put it in animated form with aliens and shit.
Yeah, like there's one episode, I can't remember if I think it's this third episode, where Clancy goes down into this world that's like flooding and he's hanging out with this character who looks like a fish in a fishbowl on top of a robot body.
Yeah.
They're wandering around and like Clancy is sort of interviewing him and they're talking about transcendental like Buddhist kind of philosophies and stuff. And they're kind of talking this through and you get to the end of it and you're like, I could not tell you what they had been talking about for the past half an hour.
I can't give you an episode 1 recap. I just can't.
So it's really like you were saying, like unlike Adventure Time, it's going to be very niche. It's going to be for people who maybe are already fans of Duncan Trussell or fans of the people that contributed, like the interviews that these are drawn from. You know, if you recognize the names of the people involved, because every episode title has like with so-and-so,
right?
Speak to the niche audience out there who might recognize those names. But it's an experience. It's like, you know, I think I appreciate it from like the animation level.
It's hilarious.
So yeah, take from that what you will. Like if it sounds like something that you might be curious about checking out, then give it a try. But don't have any like high hopes from it because it might totally rub you the wrong way.
Mm-hmm, exactly. Speaking of something that is mainstream, though, The Last Dance. So this is the Michael Jordan documentary that every Sunday and Monday just burns up Twitter.
Yes. Even I'm seeing that, like I don't follow any kind of sports stuff, but even I'm seeing the memes popping up in my Twitter.
Yeah, it's totally gripped an entire generations, like plural. Like My parents are into it, especially my dad. I'm into it, obviously. And future generations will definitely finally have like the definitive Michael Jordan story to go with it. And so they just released episodes 7 and 8. So there's 2 more to go, but episodes 7 and 8, the way the documentary is set up, it kind of has parallel timelines going on. So we just ended episode 7 with the 96 championship. So that was Jordan's first three-peat, and also the one that led him to retire and do Space Jam because of all the pressures that he had to go through and his dad's death. And then we also conclude with the 98 semifinals, which, as everyone knows, is the last time the Bulls won a championship. So their second three-peat. So you kind of have two three-peat storylines going, and it's all coming to a head in episodes 9 and 10.
Right.
It is an extremely deep dive into Michael Jordan's career. I don't think anything, like if you had followed his career, I don't think they present anything that you didn't kind of already know, but just to see it in action, just to see and hear Michael Jordan talk about it, it really humanizes him because he's always been this like larger than life athlete. I think very, very, very few athletes and very few people kind of command the kind of respect that he does worldwide, especially as an athlete and the impact that he's made on sneaker culture. Mm-hmm. And to kind of hear him talk about his career in his own terms, in his own words, he's definitely the star of the show. We definitely see a side to him that I think he hid from the public for a very, very long time.
Right. And so when we last talked about the show, it was like at least 2 episodes in, and now like we've had 4 to 6 episodes since then. So what buildup has really defined that those in between episodes? Like, as I know there was like backroom tensions between him and his teammates and all of these like arguments and things. And it feels like the meme that's been going around on Twitter the most, I guess it's from one of the new episodes, is him watching somebody kind of diss him on an iPad, and then he kind of like
laughs,
tilts his head back and laughs uproariously because he.
Yeah.
So is that connected to like somebody trying to get one over on him, but he's kind of like above it?
Yeah. So like he's famously competitive, and throughout his years, there's always been stories about how he berates his own teammates, how he's just a dick. He's an asshole to people on his team. And the main sort of thrust behind his behavior or his like explanation for it is, listen, I want to win and I need you to be at your best. And the only way I can get you to be at your best is to push you really, really fucking hard. To push you as hard as I have. And his work ethic is known to be like maniacal. Like if people thought Kobe waking up at 3-4 a.m. to shoot basketballs in practice is crazy, Michael Jordan was the first one to really do this kind of thing. He was known to have insane workouts. He'd work out in the morning, film Space Jam, go work out at night, and then into like 9 or 10 p.m. at night and just repeat every day. Like the guy was like tireless and a machine. And so the guy on the iPad was Gary Payton, who was this all-star guard from Seattle, and they had met in the 96 finals. And Gary Payton was known as like a very, very good defensive player. And the Bulls kind of went out to a lead in the series, and then Gary Payton was put on tasked to defend Michael Jordan and kind of at least made it a little bit of a challenge. The Bulls won anyway. And so Gary Payton, who is famously known for his trash talk, started talking about how like, oh, he managed to slow Jordan down. Oh, how he managed to make it a little tougher on Jordan. Jordan laughs because there is no way he thinks he is any less than God on the basketball court. Like to him, there's no peer. If you think you're as good as him or better than him, he will make it his life mission to just like blast you into oblivion. So him laughing at Gary Payton's comments is just like, I think a testament to how he sees himself, really. How he sees himself as above the competition because he worked for it, because he knows in his mind that no matter what, I am going to be the winner.
It's a moment that works really well as like a meme because obviously like you can kind of insert whatever footage you want and kind of turn it into whatever you want, but it also speaks like it's a great moment because it also sums up the actual spirit of the documentary as well.
Yeah, a little bit. And in contrast to the other previous Jordan meme, which is the crying Jordan meme.
Yeah.
So he was crying when he was inducted in the Hall of Fame. He made the speech, which, by the way, just threw a bunch of people under the bus. Like, I'm better than you. I'm better than you. I'm better than you. Those kind of speeches. And he's kind of tearing up and he's crying, and people have played around with that one. And so this laughing one is kind of like the direct opposite of that.
Yeah.
And so the joke is that, like, Michael Jordan's still the greatest because somehow he made this documentary and created a new meme that supersedes the old meme that was like one of the most famous in the world.
Yeah. And well, that and especially since, anybody who kind of like does a documentary series like this stands a certain amount of risk to their public image if the documentary reveals something that they wouldn't have otherwise kind of made public. And obviously, I think like he had a certain amount of control over what this documentary was going to.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
I think so. Definitely. Yeah. I think the key for episodes 7 and 8 was the relationship between him and his dad. That's highlighted because his dad was killed in a robbery, went missing for 3 weeks before he was found in a river in North Carolina, I believe. And so I think you really do see not necessarily a softer side to Jordan, but a side to him that wasn't interested in killing everyone on the court.
Right.
A side of him that really like shows off a lot of the sacrifices and a lot of the pain that he had endured. Because there's one episode where they just kind of film him sitting on the couch at the height of his fame, and he can't enjoy it. He can't go outside without being mobbed, and he hated that life. And that was one of the reasons why he retired the first time, was because he was just so sick of everything.
Right.
And so even if you're not like a basketball fan, I think there are moments that give you like a glimpse of the life of a superstar celebrity that we don't get to see, like the most unglamorous side. Like the money's great, the attention's great, but the lifestyle itself is never really what you think it is. And I think that was really, really well done. All right. So to conclude All Day and Night, what's your final score, final thoughts?
I'm thinking like I'm coming in like kind of middling on my score because, like I said, it didn't really connect with me. I can see the value of some of the components, but it didn't really add up to a whole lot. So I don't know. I'm going like maybe 2.5 out of 4 on that.
Mm-hmm. I'm going 3 out of 4. I really enjoyed it actually. I know it's cliched, but I think there are good reasons for it. And what about the Eddy?
The Eddy, well, of course, I'm not finished watching it all yet, but I mean, right now I'm hovering at a solid like 3 out of 4. And
okay, so I'm at about a 2.5 out of 4.
Okay.
I see the appeal. Just like you said, it's not necessarily for me. I don't have a lot of patience for assholes, geniuses or not.
And then that brings us to Midnight Gospel. I have no idea what to rank that. I don't know how to score this kind of thing. I give it a 3 out of 4 for like being entertaining, but whether it's intellectually smart or dumb, or I don't even know what to think of it, to be honest. Yeah, I think your score entirely depends on what substance you've consumed and how much of it.
Yeah, you're probably coming with a score like 5 out of 4 or something crazy like that. Something existential, you know?
Like I rate this like 5 basketballs out of 1 ice cream cone.
Exactly. Something like that. That's a perfect way of putting it, actually.
Yeah. And then The Last Dance, like it sounds like you're pretty impressed by this on the whole.
Well, so here, my biggest gripe is that because you have 2 parallel timelines coming to a head, at the beginning, when it's like 1983 and 1998, that 15-year gap, the parallel storylines work. But when the gap between the events becomes 2 or 3 years, it kind of becomes a little hard to keep track. So I kind of take points off for the format. The one thing that this documentary does is that, as you alluded to before, is that they show these interviews that they conducted and show it to Jordan and get his reaction out of it. Kind of like a reaction video off YouTube. I think that's kind of interesting. I think there's certain things I wish I knew more about. So it's a solid 3.5 out of 4. I don't think it'll ever be a 4 out of 4, but definitely a solid 3.5 because there's so much to talk about, and it can start so many different conversations.
Right.
And I highly recommend it again.
Okay. Well, that's a good note. All right. Well, there you have it. Those are our rankings for some of the things that we've been watching in the past couple of weeks. head on over to kinetoscope.ca, where, of course, we're always posting lots of extra thoughts on some of the stuff that we talk about here on the show. And until the next episode, my name is Robert Snow in Toronto.
And this is Jason Chen in Vancouver. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.